ever, looked around at the institutions governing your life? You know, the corporation you work for, or universities, the media, maybe even local government.
Right, the stuff we interact with every day.
Yeah, exactly. And have you ever felt like they're just running on a fundamentally broken operating system?
Oh, absolutely.
Like you're watching this machine that actively rewards conformity over competence. And it just punishes anyone who points out that the load-bearing pillars of the bridge are starting to crack.
Which is a terrifying thing to realize.
It is, but what if I told you that this isn't just like a case of bad politics or corrupt management? What if this is actually a fundamental structural collapse in how we understand reality itself?
I mean, it basically comes down to a question of architecture, right? We're so prone to thinking of societal decay as just a cultural issue or an economic one.
Sure, yeah.
But what if it's actually metaphysical? What if the foundational code that, compiles our reality has just been forgotten?
Right.
Or worse, like deliberately wiped from the hard drive?
And that question is exactly the engine driving today's deep dive. But before we get into the heavy mechanics of all this, just a quick reminder.
Got to pay the bills.
Right. If you're getting value out of these deep dives, please hit that like button and subscribe to the show. It really is the only way we can keep bringing you this level of analysis.
Yeah, please do.
Because today we are reviewing a genuinely fascinating, incredibly dense new ebook. It's called Ruliad of Universal Logos, CTMU, The Word, and Implications for Science by Conrad Riker.
And it is a heavy hitter.
Oh, it really is. If you're someone who thinks in systems, if you care about the logical structure of reality, you should absolutely buy this book right now. You can get it on Amazon, Kindle, or Google Play Books.
Highly recommend grabbing a copy.
Definitely. And you can also follow the author on Substack at Conrad Riker.
It's a book that really demands your absolute undivided attention. Like, the framework Riker lays out is intensely, almost ruthlessly logical.
Yeah, it doesn't mess around.
Not at all. It's this systems-level analysis of how modern science lost its metaphysical anchor. And how what he terms anti-logos ideologies captured our institutions by manipulating language.
Which we're going to get into in a bit.
Right. And ultimately, it's about how the men who historically build and maintain the load-bearing structures of civilization can reclaim objective reality.
And just to set the stage for you listening right now, we need to be very clear about our mission here.
Yes, very important.
This book contains some very strong, highly specific critiques of modern social justice movements, postmodernism, and institutional narratives.
It pulls no punches.
Exactly. So our goal today is to impartially map out Riker's exact arguments. We aren't here to take sides or endorse a political faction or tell you what to believe.
Right, we're just the messengers.
We're here to present the architecture of his thought, the exact mechanics of his framework. That way you can take these analytical tools and use them to evaluate the systems you operate in every single day. We are just laying out the blueprint.
Which is exactly how Riker approaches it, to be fair. He looks at society like an engineer looking at a failing bridge.
And to understand why it's failing, we have to go back in time, right?
Yeah, he argues we have to go back to a very specific moment when the foundation of modern science just cracked. And he traces this crash not to, like, a modern sociological event or a recent election.
Right.
He traces it back to a physics conference in Brussels almost a century ago, the 1927 Solvay Conference.
Okay. I want to slow down and really live in this historical moment because this is where the detective story begins, and it's super vital for everything else.
Oh, it's the inciting incident for sure.
Right. So the 1927 Solvay Conference is legendary. You've got Albert Einstein, Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, Erwin Schrödinger.
Literally the greatest collection of human intellect ever assembled in one room.
Exactly. And according to Riker, this was the exact moment where physics essentially chose to stop caring about reality.
Yep.
So walk me through the mechanics of that, like what actually happened in that room.
Well, it was basically a philosophical war over the soul of science, but it was disguised as a debate about quantum mechanics.
Okay.
Einstein and Bohr were fighting over this fundamental, foundational question. Is the universe an objective reality that we discover? Or is it merely like a set of phenomena that we impose order on through our measurements?
Right. Like, is it out there or is it just in our heads when we look at it?
Exactly. And Bohr championed what eventually became known as the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. He argued that the mathematical wave functions, the equations they use to predict quantum behavior, they don't describe objective reality.
Wait, then what do they describe?
They only describe our knowledge of reality. They describe the measurements themselves.
So to translate that for a second, Bohr is basically saying that if you ask what an electron is doing when no one is looking at it, you're asking a stupid question.
Basically, yeah. In Bohr's view, asking what the electron is doing unobserved is a category mistake. It's meaningless. He argued that physics shouldn't be in the business of defining what reality is, only what we can say about it based on our instruments.
And Einstein just utterly rejected that, right?
Oh, yeah, totally.
I mean, he famously said, God does not play dice with the universe. But I guess his deeper objection was really about realism.
Exactly. He wanted an objective, intelligible reality beneath the math. He believed the universe had a structure independent of whether a human being was pointing a telescope or a microscope at it.
He believed it was real regardless of us.
He did. But, Bohr won that argument.
Mm-hmm.
And Riker points out a really crucial historical mechanism here. Bohr didn't necessarily win because the physics proved him definitively right.
He didn't.
No, he won because the philosophical groundwork for his victory had already been laid centuries earlier by René Descartes.
Ah, the Cartesian split.
Exactly. Descartes famously divided reality into two distinct realms, right? Mind and matter.
Okay, break that down for me.
In the Cartesian framework, matter is just dead, unthinking extension in space. It has no inherent meaning, no inherent logic, no intelligible structure on its own.
It's just dumb stuff.
Right, just dumb stuff. And the mind is the only thing that possesses logic or language. So by the time Niels Bohr stood up at the Solvay conference in 1927, the scientific community was already, philosophically primed.
Primed to accept what?
To accept that the physical world is just a bunch of dumb data we measure, not a structured, logical reality we can actually understand.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Bohr's victory officially severed physics from metaphysics, and it led directly to the unofficial yet universally understood mantra of modern physics, which is shut up and calculate.
Shut up and calculate. Which, okay, I have to play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
That mindset is incredibly effective if your goal is just to build a laser or a microchip or an MRI machine.
Sure, practically speaking.
Right. If I'm an engineer and the quantum equations predict outcomes to 12 decimal places, which they do, I mean, it's the most tested theory in human history, why does it matter if we don't know what a wave function actually is?
That's a fair question.
Isn't a map that gets you to your destination good enough? Why do I need to know the metaphysical composition of the dirt under my feet if the map just gets me home?
And that is the exact defense the modern physics establishment uses today. It's pure instrumentalism. But Riker argues that this trade-off trading true structural understanding for mere calculational power, it turns science into a self-enclosed language game.
A language game.
Yeah, a game with no reality to reference. To use your map analogy, it's like having a map that tells you when to turn left or right. And it works perfectly, but you have no idea if you're driving a car, flying a plane, or walking on the surface of Mars.
So it's blind.
Exactly. You have syntax, but you have no semantics. You have no meaning. And Riker points to the 1956 Chan-Shunwu experiment as the perfect, glaring example of this structural collapse in physics.
Ah, the parity violation experiment. I am fascinated by this, but you have to break down the actual physics for the listener.
Absolutely.
What was the experiment, and why does Riker think it exposes the rot in the shut up and calculate mindset?
So, before 1956, physicists believed the universe was completely symmetrical. They believed in something called parity conservation.
Meaning what, exactly?
It basically means that the universe doesn't have a preference for left or right. If you run a physics experiment, and then you run the exact same experiment while looking at it in a mirror, the physics should work exactly the same way. The mirror image of the universe should obey the same laws.
Because why wouldn't it? If the universe is just dumb, dead matter, it shouldn't care if an atom is spinning clockwise or counterclockwise. Space is just space.
Exactly. But Dr. Chan-Shunwu, who was this brilliant experimental physicist, she decided to actually test this. She used the beta decay of cobalt-60 atoms.
Okay.
She cooled them down to near absolute zero and aligned their magnetic spins. And what she found shocked the entire physics world.
What happened?
The electrons emitted during the decay heavily favored one direction. They were asymmetrical. She proved that the weak nuclear force, which is one of the four fundamental forces of nature, it actually distinguishes left from right.
Wow.
Yeah, the universe has a built-in, intrinsic left-handed preference.
Which means reality isn't just a blank canvas of space. It has a grain to it, like wood.
That is a brilliant way to put it, actually. It has a structural grain. And Riker points out that this discovery should have been a metaphysical earthquake.
It changes everything.
It really does. It proves the cosmos isn't just a random pile of data. It has an inherent, structured form written into its very bones, a syntax.
But what did the physics community do?
Well, instead of stopping everything and asking why reality has a preferred direction, instead of asking what that means about the fundamental geometry of existence, they just took the data, shoved it into the mathematical machinery of the standard model as a new arbitrary parameter, and went right back to calculating.
They just updated the spreadsheet, they added a new row for left-handed preference, hit save, and completely ignored what it meant for the overall architecture of the company.
Precisely. They treated it as a data point to be fitted, not a revelation to be understood. And Riker argues that this exact instrumentalism, treating math as just a predictive tool without an underlying ontology or structure, is exactly why we are currently trapped in what he calls the lost math era.
The lost math era. Okay, we need to spend some time here.
It's important.
Because to the average guy listening, science seems like it's moving faster than ever. We hear about billions of dollars being spent on the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland. We hear about string theory, multiverses, dark matter. It sounds like physics is booming. So how does Riker argue we're lost?
What he means is foundational stagnation. If you look at the timeline from the 1970s to the 2020s, the number of physics papers published, the number of PhDs granted, the billions of dollars spent, they've all grown exponentially. But we have had absolutely zero new foundational breakthroughs. The standard model of particle physics was essentially finished in the 1970s. Since then, nothing fundamental has changed.
Wait, what about all the theories we constantly hear about in pop science documentaries?
They are entirely unproven mathematical abstractions. Take supersymmetry, for instance.
Okay.
For decades, physicists promised that if we just built a bigger particle collider, we would find a whole zoo of superpartner particles that would balance out the math. So we built the Large Hadron Collider, turned it on, and found nothing. Zero superpartners.
Just a giant expensive loop of nothing.
Exactly. Then you have string theory, which requires 10 or 11 dimensions to make its math work. Dimensions we cannot see, access, or test.
That sounds like science fiction.
It basically is at this point. Riker argues that this is what happens when you abandon reality. You end up endlessly piling abstractions on top of abstractions. Because without a metaphysical anchor, without a logical structure to ground the math, you are no longer doing physics. You are just writing fantasy fiction with numbers.
So, if materialism, the Cartesian idea that the universe is just dumb, syntaxless matter waiting for a human mind to measure it, if that's a dead end that leads to a 50-year plateau in physics, what is the alternative?
Right, that's the big question.
If the universe isn't just dead putty, what is its actual foundational structure? If the shut up and calculate map is wrong, what does the real map look like?
Well, to answer that, Riker brings in the concept of the Ruliad.
The Ruliad.
Yeah, this is a term originally coined by the physicist and computer scientist Stephen Wolfram, and Riker adopts it as the absolute bedrock of his entire metaphysical framework. But we have to be very careful here.
Why?
Because the Ruliad is not a theory. It's not a hypothesis competing with string theory or quantum loop gravity. The Ruliad is the total exhaustive space of all possible computational rules and programs running simultaneously.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there, because that sounds incredibly abstract, almost impenetrable. Let's ground this for a second. When we say the universe is computational, we aren't using a metaphor, right? We aren't saying it's like a computer program in the way my laptop runs Windows. Riker is arguing it literally is computation.
Yes, literally. Think about how we traditionally view the laws of physics. We usually think of them as these mystical, invisible laws imposed on matter from some outside realm, right? Like gravity tells matter how to move.
Sure.
But under the concept of the Ruliad, the laws of physics are not external dictators. They are compression algorithms. They're the translation of the vast, exhaustive code of the Ruliad into our specific observable universe.
So every action is just executing code.
Yes. Every time a particle collides or a star forms or an apple falls from a tree, it is not obeying a law in the human sense.
Yeah.
It is executing lines of code from this ultimate source.
Okay, let me try to make this visual, because Riker brings up John Conway's Game of Life in the book, and I think it's the perfect bridge for this.
A great example.
If you're listening and you've never seen Conway's Game of Life, you can just pull it up on YouTube. It is entirely played on an infinite grid of squares, like a massive piece of graph paper.
Right.
And there are only 4 incredibly simple rules. The rules just dictate whether a square turns black or white, basically whether it lives or dies, based entirely on how many neighboring squares are black or white. That's it. 4 lines of basic code.
Exactly. It's incredibly basic.
But, and this is where it gets crazy, if you let that program run, those 4 simple rules start to generate massive complexity. The squares form patterns that move across the screen, which people call spaceships.
Yeah.
They form patterns that shoot out other patterns, which are factories. People have literally built working Turing machines, actual functioning computers that can do math inside the game of life, using only those 4 rules.
And that is the exact mechanism you have to understand. Nobody designed the spaceships. Nobody sat down and coded a factory or a computer into the game. The complexity emerges inevitably from the syntax of those 4 rules.
It's baked in.
Yet the rules contain the infinite complexity the exact same way a tiny acorn contains a massive oak tree. Riker is arguing that the Ruliad is the ultimate cosmic version of this. It is the space of all possible rules.
Riker has a brilliant analogy in the book to explain how the Ruliad filters these rules. He says, it's like a physicist walking into a bar and ordering every possible drink. The bartender, who is pure logic, serves them all at once. The only thing carded at the door is logical inconsistency.
That analogy perfectly encapsulates the mechanics of it. The Ruliad contains every conceivable universe. A universe with different gravitational constants, different geometries, different rule sets. But the bartender pure logic only serves what works.
So if it doesn't work,
If a rule system contradicts itself, it crashes. It cannot execute, it simply doesn't exist. Logical consistency is the absolute floor of reality, which, Riker points out, neatly destroys one of the oldest and most frustrating philosophical questions in human history.
oh, you mean why is there something rather than nothing? People have been arguing about that since the ancient Greeks.
Right. But Riker argues that asking, why is there something rather than nothing, is actually a malformed question. It's a syntax error.
But syntax error.
Yeah. Nothingness is not a valid state. Think about it mechanically. Nothing is a contradiction in terms, because to conceptualize a state of absolute non-existence requires a framework to define it, which is something.
Wow.
Nothing is an attempted state that cannot sustain its own logic. It crashes at the door of the bar. Therefore, the universe exists simply because logical consistency is the baseline requirement for reality. The code is running because the space of all programs that never crash must mathematically run.
Okay, this is blowing my mind a bit, but let me push back, or at least look for the edge of this concept.
Sure, let's test it.
If the universe is this massive, exhaustive, executable program running every possible logically consistent rule, where's the computer running it? And who is looking at the screen?
The observer question.
Right. If there is no outside to the universe, because the universe is everything by definition, how does it process itself? A program on my laptop needs a CPU, and it needs a user.
This brings us to the third pillar of Riker's framework, and this is where it gets incredibly rigorous. He integrates Christopher Langan's cognitive theoretic model of the universe. It is commonly referred to as the CTMU.
The CTMU.
Yes. To answer your question, because the universe is everything, there is no external environment, there is no outside observer, there is no cosmic hard drive sitting on a desk somewhere outside of space and time. Therefore, the universe must describe and process itself from within.
So it's a closed loop. But how does a system process itself?
Well, Langan defines reality as a self-configuring, self-processing language, or SESPL.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there. Self-configuring, self-processing language sounds like academic word salad.
Fair enough.
To the guy listening in his truck on the way to a job site, what is the actual mechanism there? Break that down.
Let's use a mechanical example. Imagine you have a computer program, but instead of the code being separate from the hardware, the code is the hardware. The universe is the code, it is the compiler, and it is the machine itself, all simultaneously.
That's trippy.
It operates through a mechanism Langan calls telic recursion.
Telic recursion, meaning what exactly?
Telic meaning purpose or goal-oriented, and recursion meaning a process that repeats itself, feeding its output back in as its input. In telic recursion, the cosmos continuously writes, reads, and edits its own source code to fulfill its logical constraints.
So it's adapting.
Yes, it is constantly updating its own state based on its previous state, optimizing for logical consistency.
You know, there's an amazing anecdote in the book to illustrate this exact mechanism. Riker talks about a senior telecom engineer at a major firm.
Oh, I love this story.
Right, so this engineer is trying to debug a recurring network failure that's taking down massive chunks of the system. He digs through millions of lines of code, and he finally traces the anomaly back to a single line of self-replicating code. But here's the kicker. The code wasn't just blindly executing instructions. It was actively rewriting its own execution parameters based on the feedback of its previous cycles. The system was debugging itself. It was altering its own grammar in real time to fix the network flow.
Is adapting.
Exactly. And the engineer leans back in his chair, staring at the screen, and realizes the machine is reading its own mind.
That is exactly it. That anecdote is the exact threshold where standard dead matter physics ends and the CTMU begins.
Yeah.
The universe doesn't just sit there like a lump of clay waiting for us to measure it.
Right.
It compiles. It is a system whose syntax actively generates its own semantics. It reads its own mind.
But wait, let me jump in here and bring this down to human scale. Because if the universe is this giant self-compiling network loop, constantly rewriting its own parameters to maintain logical consistency, where do you and I fit in?
Good question.
Where does human consciousness or free will exist in a cosmic compiler? Are we just passive lines of code waiting to be executed? What materialists call meat machines?
That is the ultimate trap of the Cartesian split. And it's exactly what the CTMU solves. It completely dissolves the mind-body problem.
How so?
Let me explain why. In Descartes' view, mind and matter are two totally different substances. Mind is spiritual or ethereal, matter is physical, which makes it literally impossible to explain how they interact.
Right. How does a ghost move a wrench?
Exactly. How does a non-physical thought move your physical arm? Materialists look at this impossible contradiction and they solve it by simply claiming consciousness is an illusion. They say your thoughts are just a chemical accident in a meat machine and free will doesn't exist.
Which, frankly, never feels true to anyone actually living a human life, building a house, or, making a difficult moral choice.
Because it isn't true structurally. Under the CTMU framework, mind and matter are not two different substances fighting each other. They are two different execution states of the exact same underlying grammar.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah. Riker argues that you are not a passive observer trapped inside a meat machine. Consciousness is the active self-recognition of the universe processing its own structure.
So we are part of the hardware reading the software.
You are a localized node of agency. The universe is infinite, so it needs localized points to process specific, granular logic. Yeah, that is you. When you make a logical choice, when you physically build a structure, when you fix an engine, you are the universe locally processing its own source code.
This shifts the entire perspective. If the universe operates as a self-processing language, and we are localized nodes actively processing that language, then human language, the actual words we use when we speak to each other, when we write laws, when we define reality, they must be far more than just arbitrary sounds we invented to point at trees and rocks.
This is perhaps the most profound pivot in the entire book. We are moving from physics to what Riker calls the logos, or the word. He argues that words are not just tools for social coordination, like apes grunting to point out a predator. Words, in their purest logical form, are the actual stuff of creation. Meaning is identical to existence.
Okay, I'm going to challenge that directly. Saying meaning is identical to existence or equating spoken words with physical reality sounds like mystical poetry. It sounds like a religious metaphor, not physics. Defend that. How does a word bind cause to effect in a physical universe?
It sounds mystical only because we have been trained by the Cartesian split to view words as just air and matter as the real stuff. But bring it back to information theory. Riker connects ancient theology straight into modern thermodynamics.
Thermodynamics, really?
Yes. He looks at the opening of the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Riker doesn't treat this as just a pretty poetic metaphor. He views this as a literal, structural, mechanistic description of a self-processing reality.
Okay, map the mechanics of that for me. How is language thermodynamic?
The language is thermodynamic because information has a physical mass and a physical cost. Riker equates the logos to coding in C++N.
Okay, I can follow that.
Think about a software compiler on your laptop. If a programmer inputs a sequence of strictly typed words in a perfect logical hierarchy, if they type the exact correct syntax, the compiler translates those linguistic commands into physical actions. The syntax forces electrons to flow through specific physical silicon gates. The machine works flawlessly. But if a single semicolon is missing, or a term is equivocated, or a variable is undefined, what happens? The system crashes. The code refuses to compile. Exactly. The machine doesn't care about the programmer's intentions. It doesn't care about their feelings or their political beliefs. It only cares about the syntax. Riker argues the logos is the ultimate cosmic compiler. The cosmos processes its own linguistic commands to maintain physical structure.
So bad words equal bad structure.
Yeah, so treating words as cheap or treating definitions as subjective or pretending a word can mean whatever you want it to mean based on your feelings is literally an offense against physics.
This point right here is going to resonate incredibly hard for the guys listening who are trying to navigate today's world. We live in an era where words are constantly twisted. But when you treat language as just a tool for social manipulation, you are essentially introducing junk code into the cosmic system.
It's malware.
Right. Conversely, when a man speaks the truth, when he names reality accurately and refuses to flinch or apologize for the truth, he isn't just being morally good, he is literally aligning his personal hardware with the cosmic mainframe. He is executing clean code.
That is the exact takeaway. Speaking the truth is a structural necessity, not just a moral suggestion. You are aligning with the unyielding mechanics of the universe. But this raises the critical, dangerous question that forms the second half of Riker's book.
Which is?
If exact precise language is the only thing that aligns us with the cosmos, what happens to a society that deliberately alters definitions? What happens to institutions that decide meaning is entirely subjective and fluid?
And this brings us directly into Riker's structural diagnosis of modern institutions. According to the book, postmodernism isn't just an annoying, overly academic philosophy you learn in a liberal arts college. He describes it as a cognitive bioweapon.
Yes, a bioweapon.
He claims it is a virus that specifically attacks a society's ability to distinguish reality from language.
We need to be very precise here in mapping Riker's argument impartially, because he is naming specific movements. Riker argues that our major institutions, the universities, corporate HR departments, the courts, the media, have been thoroughly compromised.
Captured.
Right. And the mechanism of that compromise wasn't a physical takeover. It was linguistic. It was severing words from their objective realities. He explicitly links this capture to specific ideologies, including postmodern, feminist, and Marxist frameworks.
And to reiterate for the audience, we are strictly outlining Riker's structural diagnosis here. We aren't taking a political stance. We are mapping how he claims the grammar stage of institutional logic has been corrupted. According to Riker, how do these frameworks actually operate? What is their mechanical function?
According to his analysis, these frameworks operate by reframing objective truth as a power construct. In this ideology, there is no objective reality. There are only competing narratives used by groups to gain power. Therefore, they reframe objectivity itself as a form of oppression.
So facts are oppressive.
Exactly. Furthermore, they treat masculine reason, logical deduction, and strict definitions as pathologies that need to be cured or dismantled.
Riker argues this isn't just a random cultural drift, right? It is a mechanical, predictable process of capture. It's like watching a virus hack a cell.
It's highly systematic.
Yeah, he lays out specific tactical maneuvers these ideologies use to infect an institution's logic board. Let's walk through these because this is the diagnostic tool the listener can use tomorrow morning at work. The first tactic he identifies is term pinning evasion.
Term pinning evasion is the deliberate redefinition of foundational words to enforce compliance without passing new laws. You steal the moral weight of an old word and pin it to a new, radical concept.
Can you give an example?
The best example he uses is the word safety. Historically, in a corporate or industrial setting, safety meant physical protection from bodily harm. Hard hats, safety goggles, securing scaffolding.
Right. If I am an engineer, safety means the boiler doesn't explode.
Exactly. But the ideological virus expands the definition of safety to mean protection from emotional discomfort or disagreeable ideas. Once safety is redefined in the corporate handbook, the institution can weaponize HR safety protocols to silence dissent.
So if you disagree with a new company policy, you aren't just dissenting, you are making people feel unsafe.
Precisely. Another example he uses is equity. Historically, it meant equal opportunity. The virus shifts it to mean mandated equal outcomes.
And here is the trap. If you object to the new definition, you are immediately accused of being against safety or against equity, which leads perfectly into the second tactic he maps, the Motte-and-Bailey maneuver.
The Motte-and-Bailey is a classic logical fallacy, but Riker says it has been weaponized at a massive institutional scale. Think of a medieval castle. You have the Motte, which is a small, highly defensible tower on a hill, and below it is the Bailey, which is a large, fertile but hard to defend courtyard.
Okay, I picture it.
The tactic works by conflating two arguments. The Motte is a highly defensible, easily agreeable claim. For example, we should listen to people's different experiences and be kind.
Nobody's going to argue with that. It's totally defensible.
Right. But the Bailey is a radical, highly controversial claim. For example, objective truth, timeliness, and meritocracy are tools of white supremacy that must be dismantled.
Let me put this in a 3-minute corporate HR scenario, because this happens every day. An HR consultant comes into a company and advances into the Bailey. They start pushing the radical agenda, telling employees that merit-based hiring is discriminatory. A guy sitting in the back of the room finally raises his hand and says, wait, how can hiring the most competent engineer be discriminatory? We build airplanes, we need the best people.
And how does the consultant react? They immediately retreat to the mod.
Yeah.
They say, wow, I am just saying we should be inclusive and listen to diverse experiences. Why are you so hostile to kindness?
It's a bait and switch. They push the radical claim, and the second they face logical friction, they retreat to the agreeable claim, making the guy defending reality look like an aggressive jerk.
Exactly. Completely short circuits rational debate. And the third tactic Riker identifies is burden of proof inversion.
What's that?
In any logically sound system, like the American legal system historically, the person making the claim bears the burden of proof. You are innocent until proven guilty. But the ideological virus mathematically flips this. It makes an accusation, for example, claiming that any disparate impact in hiring proves systemic discrimination and forces the accused institution to prove their innocence.
Which demands you prove a negative. You have to prove that your hiring manager didn't have hidden unconscious bias, which is logically impossible.
It is a mathematical impossibility, and that is the point. The goal isn't to find the truth. The goal is to paralyze the target.
So connecting this back to the big picture of the Ruliad and logical consistency. Why does this virus spread so effectively? If it is fundamentally logically incoherent, if it relies on fallacies and impossible burdens of proof, why does it successfully capture Fortune 500 companies, Ivy League universities, and the military? Why doesn't the system crash immediately?
Because, as Riker points out, a biological or ideological virus doesn't need to be logically consistent to spread. It just needs a mechanism of transmission, the appearance of moral authority, and a host population that is too intimidated, too polite, or too comfortable to push back.
So it preys on politeness.
Yes, it hijacks the institution's operating system by altering the incentive structure. It makes the social and economic cost of naming reality higher than the cost of just shutting up and complying.
So let's put the listeners squarely in the center of this. Let's say you are listening to this right now in your cubicle or on your commute, and you realize, wow, my corporate job or my local school board or my city council is fully infected by this virus. How do you actually measure the rot? You know it's bad, but how do you map the actual reality of the system you are trapped inside without just getting angry?
This is where Riker introduces his most practical diagnostic tool, the Logos Incentive Matrix. Riker argues that you can diagnose the exact health of any institution, from a marriage to a multinational corporation to an entire empire, by measuring the mathematical gap between its stated mission and its actual incentive gradient.
Meaning, what behavior is the system actually rewarding and what is it punishing?
Precisely. You do not look at the corporate brochure. You do not read the mission statement plastered on the wall in the lobby. You look purely at the math. What are the inputs and what are the outputs?
Yeah.
If you map the incentives, the answers will reveal the true telos, the ultimate aim or purpose of the system. The system is always doing exactly what it is incentivized to do.
We need to dive deep into Riker's examples here because they are devastatingly clear and they prove how this matrix works in the real world. Let's start with Enron.
Good example.
A lot of people, when they hear Enron, they just think it was a case of bad apples, human greed, a few corrupt executives at the top who ruined it for everyone. But Riker argues that's a childish analysis. He says it was a purely mathematical collapse of incentive structures. Walk me through the Enron matrix.
Enron is the perfect example of a broken Logos incentive matrix. Their stated mission was to be the world's leading energy company through innovation. But let's look at the actual mathematical incentives. First, they used a performance review system called rank and yang.
Which means?
Every single year, the company was mandated to fire the bottom 15% of employees, regardless of overall company performance. Second, executives were rewarded with massive stock options tied purely to short-term stock price increases. Third, and most fatally, they used mark-to-market accounting.
Right.
This allowed them to build a power plant, project what they thought it would earn over the next 10 years, and book all that imaginary future revenue as actual profit today.
So the math is inflate your projected numbers to insane levels, boost the stock price today so the executives get paid, and if you are a mid-level manager, you better hide any losses or you fall into the bottom 15% and get fired.
Exactly. Fraud didn't happen because of greed. Fraud became the mathematical equilibrium of the system. Enron didn't fail because it had greedier people than other companies on Wall Street. It failed because its logical structure, its logos incentive matrix, made honesty a mathematically losing move.
Wow.
The system compiled exactly the code it was given. When a system incentivizes fiction, reality eventually forecloses on it.
He applies the exact same audit to modern academia, which is heavily relevant to the capture we were just talking about. The modern university's stated mission is the fearless pursuit of objective truth. But what does the incentive gradient actually reward? Let's map it.
If you look at the tenure track, the university rewards citation metrics. How many times your paper is cited by others. It rewards grant capture, meaning how much money you bring in from the government. And it rewards ideological conformity with the department heads.
And what does it punish?
It severely punishes heterodox inquiry. It punishes anyone trying to replicate other people's work, because attempting replication often exposes fraud, which threatens the prestige of the university and the flow of grant money.
Therefore, Riker argues, the true telos of modern academia is not truth. The actual output of the machine is the accumulation of institutional prestige and the protection of the administrative class.
Which is why we are living through a massive replication crisis in science right now. In fields like psychology, sociology, and even oncology, huge percentages of peer-reviewed papers cannot be replicated. It isn't an accident. It is the logical output of a system that mathematically rewards publication volume over actual accuracy.
And the terrifying thing is that Riker scales this exact diagnostic tool all the way up to empires. He looks at the Roman Republic. He points out that the Republic survived for centuries because the incentive structure rewarded public service and restraint. The classic example is Cincinnatus. The Republic is in danger. They give him absolute dictatorial power to save the army. He wins the war, and instead of crowning himself king, what does he do?
He immediately gives the power back and returns to his plow. He goes back to his farm. Because the societal incentive matrix of the early Republic rewarded restraint with immense honor. But Riker maps how that matrix broke. By the late Republic, massive foreign conquest brought in endless slave labor, which completely gutted the Roman middle class of farmers. The incentive structure shifted dramatically.
It shifted from public service to private provincial plunder?
Exactly. The Roman governors realized that a military command in a place like Gaul wasn't a duty. It was a license to steal on an industrial scale. You borrow money in Rome to bribe your way into office, you go to a province, you strip mine it for wealth, and you use that wealth to pay off your debts and buy your own private army.
So when Julius Caesar crosses the Rubicon with his army, marching on Rome itself, Riker is saying it wasn't a glitch in the Matrix.
It was the inevitable compilation of a broken incentive structure. The Republic had incentivized private warlords over public servants for a century. Caesar was just the final output of that bad code. When an institution's stated logic fully detaches from its reward function, the institution is essentially scheduling its own collapse.
Okay, I have to stop you because I know exactly what every guy listening to this is thinking right now.
That's that.
Let's say you've done the audit. You've looked at your company or your local government. You've mapped the power structure. You see the gap between the stated mission and the reality, and the gap is massive. The incentives reward compliance and punish truth. Should you fight it? Should you be the martyr who stands up in the all-hands HR meeting and speaks truth to the system?
Riker's advice here is brutally cold, but highly practical. He explicitly advocates for what he calls strategic calm. He strongly warns against being the martyr.
Don't be the martyr.
Right. The martyr, he argues, is usually just consumed by the system. The machine grinds them up, and then the administration uses their destruction as a warning to terrify everyone else into deeper compliance. Standing up and yelling in an HR meeting actually makes the corrupt system stronger because it allows them to identify and purge the non-compliant nodes.
So, do not throw yourself onto the gears of a machine that is literally designed to grind you up. That isn't bravery, it's bad math.
Exactly. Do not fight a power map head-on unless you possess the structural capacity and the leverage to actually alter it. Instead, achieve strategic calm. Stop reacting emotionally to institutional cowardice because once you map the incentives, you no longer expect anything else. It's like getting mad at gravity for making a rock fall.
It just is what it is.
Audit the reward function. Quietly map the power structure and position yourself where the current aligns with reality. And if the institution is totally unsalvageable, your job is not to fix it. Your job is to build a counterstructure.
Which brings us to the most actionable, critical part of this entire deep dive. If the current institutions are mathematically destined to collapse because of this broken incentive matrix, it leaves the individual in a vacuum. How does a man actually build something durable in the middle of that collapse? How do you build a counterstructure? What is the specific role of the men listening to this?
Riker answers this by introducing the concept of the male function. He argues that civilization is not a natural state of rest. Civilization is, fundamentally, a massive, unnatural, load-bearing structure. It constantly wants to decay into entropy.
Sure.
Historically, it has been maintained by the male function, by builders, engineers, and fathers, men who impose intelligible, objective structure on chaotic matter.
And we hear a lot of guys today, especially accelerationists in the manosphere, guys who are exhausted by the capture of institutions saying, let it burn. They say the system is too corrupt, let it collapse under its own weight, and we'll see what happens on the other side. But Riker completely rejects that accelerationist urge.
He absolutely rejects it. He argues for restoration. But he defines restoration very specifically. It doesn't start with winning a national election or hoping a politician will save you. It doesn't start with trying to capture a university department. It starts at the very absolute bottom, with the physical transmission of objective structure from one mind to another. To achieve this, he outlines a 6-step restoration ladder.
Let's walk through these rungs because Riker insists you cannot skip them. If you try to build rung 5 before rung 1, the structure collapses. Rung 1 is grammar. Why must grammar be first?
Grammar is the ability to name reality accurately. Remember the logos. If a culture cannot define basic physical reality, if it cannot define what a male is, what a female is, what justice is, or what debt is, it cannot build anything durable. The code is already corrupted. You cannot build a steel bridge if you cannot agree on what steel is.
Rung 2 is logic.
Logic is the discipline to detect contradiction. It is the ability to reason from fixed premises to valid conclusions and to aggressively reject non sequiturs and emotional manipulation. It is the firewall against the postmodern virus.
Rung 3 is craft. And this one I absolutely love because it moves out of the theoretical and into the physical.
Craft is bodily intelligence. It is the act of physically wiring a circuit, forging a weld, writing code that actually compiles, framing a house, tuning a combustion engine. Why does this matter to the cosmic syntax? Because it is the physical, undeniable proof that matter obeys objective laws, and that reality is not negotiable.
I want to emphasize this. When you are wiring a 220-volt circuit, you cannot negotiate with the electricity. You cannot use term pinning evasion on a live wire. If you do it wrong, it will burn your house down or kill you. Craft forces a man into submission to objective rules. It grounds him in the Ruliad.
Precisely. It strips away all ideological delusions.
Yeah.
Which leads to rung 4, family. The family is the primary transmission unit of these first 3 rungs. This is the localized node where a father teaches a son how to hold a hammer, how to accept a loss with dignity, how to detect a lie, and how to tell the truth even when it hurts.
Rung 5 is school, which is essentially scaling that grammar and craft beyond the single house, pooling resources to teach multiple children. And finally, rung 6 is city, the civic order that emerges only when enough disciplined, logical people decide to govern themselves based on shared objective reality.
And this is why accelerationism fails. If you try to build or rebuild the city without the foundational rungs of grammar, logic, and craft, it instantly collapses back into chaos. To illustrate the stakes of this transmission, Riker highlights the absolute tragedy of the fatherless boy. It shows exactly what happens when this chain is broken.
Let's unpack that because it hits the core of so many societal issues today. If a boy grows up without a father to pass on craft and syntax, what is he actually missing?
He doesn't just lack a polite role model or a buddy to play catch with. Structurally speaking, he lacks a syntactic framework for reality. He hasn't been shown that actions have reliable objective consequences. He hasn't been grounded in the logos.
So what does he do? The boy still has to compile an identity.
Exactly. The human mind must compile. So without clean code from a father, he searches through junk code. He looks to street gangs, to extreme online ideologies, to destructive parasocial relationships, desperately trying to compile a working identity. And ultimately, he absorbs a syntax of chaos. He begins to believe that reality is just a subjective story, a narrative that he can alter if he just yells loud enough or commits enough violence or complains perfectly enough. He becomes a catastrophic error in the system.
So bringing it all the way home for you, the listener. If you're wondering what you are supposed to do with all this heavy philosophy, the daily practice of restoration is brutally, beautifully simple. It is not about arguing with anonymous people on the internet. It is not about becoming a martyr at work. It is local. Teach one physical skill. Fix one broken system in your house or your neighborhood. Transmit one piece of objective truth to someone younger than you. Sit down and teach a kid how to solder a copper joint. Explain to them the mechanics of how a four-stroke engine actually works. Teach them why a false premise always leads to a bad conclusion. Show them physically that the world pushes back. According to Riker, this is how the monasteries of the modern age will survive the ideological chaos. You're acting as a localized node passing down the uncorrupted source code.
It is the ultimate, quiet act of counterstructure. Form and logic can survive chaos, but only if the transmitters, the men maintaining the load-bearing walls, are willing to be disciplined, completely unfashionable, and incredibly patient across generations.
Okay, let's synthesize this incredible journey, because we have covered massive ground today. We started at the absolute cosmic limits with the Ruliad, the space of all possible crash-free programs. We moved to the CTMU, understanding the universe as a self-compiling, self-processing logic loop that reads its own mind. We tracked how the logos, the word, is the actual physical thermodynamic syntax of creation. And we followed that straight down from the cosmos into the trenches.
Right into the daily grind.
Yeah, into how postmodern ideologies act as a virus, severing language from reality, how institutions mathematically decay when their incentives don't match their missions, and finally, how you define words at your job and how you teach a kid to build something real. Riker's ultimate message is clear. Reality is not a subjective narrative. It compiles, it executes, and it absolutely, unequivocally does not care about your feelings.
Because the universe naturally eliminates logical contradictions.
Yes.
It must. A contradiction simply cannot sustain its own existence in a computational reality. Inconsistency is fundamentally unstable.
Which leaves us with one final provocative thought for you to chew on as you go about your day. If the universe naturally purges contradictions, what hidden contradictions in your own daily routines, in your personal relationships, or in your job are quietly scheduling their own inevitable collapse right now? Where is your stated mission fundamentally detached from your daily incentives?
Because the cosmic compiler is always running.
The compiler is always running. If you want to dive deeper into this framework, and trust me, we barely scratched the surface of the intense math, physics, and philosophy contained in these pages, you need to read this book. Stop what you are doing, go to Amazon Kindle or Google Playbooks right now and pick up Ruliad of Universal Logos, CTMU, The Word, and Implications for Science by Conrad Riker. And make sure you follow him on Substack at Conrad Riker to keep up with his incredibly incisive work. And of course, please like and subscribe to the show so we can keep diving deep into the systems that run our world. Until next time, keep reading The Matrix.